Yeah, I think probably a good myth that I think always is perpetuated is that voting doesn't matter, right? And I'll go in one direction here. There are a number of races, tons upon tons of races that were decided by just one vote. And if you take that even further, there are so many races that are decided by tiny, tiny fractions of votes. So, when you think about how voting doesn't matter, I think turning it on its head is really important because your vote matters so much in these tiny, tight little races. And I just think folks think that there's always this larger margin between races, but when you get to these really close fractional races, and sometimes it's even decided by one vote. I know that there was a race decided where someone, it was a tie and they had to pull a name out of a hat. I mean, think of the 5 or 10 folks that just were like, oh, I just decided not to vote today. Just didn't do it. And they probably had a strong preference for maybe one candidate over the other. So I would always vote like the margins are very thin and ensure that your voice is counted.
Okay, I have 3, but I'll be quick. So the first one is that, well, everybody in my state is going to vote a certain way, so I don't need to. I think 2016 clearly speaks to that. Polls don't hold and carry the same weight that they once did. There are many people who just don't feel comfortable responding to polls on both sides of the aisle. So 2016 just throws that out the window. I mean, even here in Washington state, where we generally on a federal level are pretty Democratic, if you are a Democrat, you should not assume that all of your neighbors are going to carry water for you. You should show up and be a part of that. Number 2, advocacy is not lobbying. I think a lot of people get confused and think, well, if I advocate on behalf of public this policy, or if I send a letter to my elected official, am I now a lobbyist? What's that threshold? You have to spend 30% of your time advocating on behalf of a specific piece of legislation to be considered lobbying. So none of this is lobbying. And third, your elected officials do want to hear from you. I know that oftentimes if you've sent a letter to them, you get a form letter back. I used to write those form letters, but I promise you, the elected official gave the policy position. They really, really want to hear from you. When they don't hear from you, that's almost worse than when they do. Like, I remember being in the senator's office and we were handling a specific public policy issue, and we were getting a lot of folks in opposition to something that we didn't think we necessarily would have in the first place. It was really important to hear that. We also had the reverse, where we thought we were doing something that the district or that the state would be really supportive of, and we heard cricket. So I think there's this assumption that, if I weigh in, it doesn't matter, or I'm only going to weigh in when I'm angry about something. Weigh in when you support something too. I can tell you our elected officials could really use some thank you, because they don't get a lot of those. And it's important to let folks know how you feel. So don't assume your neighbors are going to carry water for you. Advocacy is not lobbying, and your elected officials want to hear from you, I promise you.
Yeah, I think one thing that comes to mind for me as somebody who's lived in a lot of different states across the country, you often hear, my vote won't count because I know which way my state's going to go, right? I'm from New York originally, historically a blue state. I moved to Seattle from Atlanta, where Georgia is normally a red state. But as you can see, even now Atlanta is turning purple, not Atlanta, but Georgia is turning purple and becoming more of a blue state. And part of the advocacy is that your count counts for more than just one, right? I don't wake up in the morning on election day, go to the ballot box, cast my vote, go back home, and then that's it. I'm talking about politics with my friends, with my family, with my network. I let them know I am voting for X legislation or Y person because I want these things to change. And that may engage them. It may give them some resolve to also get involved with the process. When they hear me say, I am voting on this day for this person because I want something in my state to change, they'll say, I also want that change. So I'm also going to go vote. And then they're telling their friends and their family and their circle about that. And so there's a lot of people who say, I'm in California and I'm a Republican. Why would I bother voting? And this actually goes back to something that Rachel says too. Despite whatever my personal political leanings are, I encourage everyone I know to vote, right? I don't want you to vote the way that I vote. I just want you to vote. I want your voice to be heard. I want our representatives to represent us, even if that means I don't particularly agree with them all the time. And so I think that's one of the biggest myths, is that when you are politically active and civically engaged in casting a vote, your vote really it can have an outsized impact on the people around you and the outcomes that eventually come from that engagement.